Inventory isn't low because no one wants to sell. It's low because selling makes life more expensive. For millions of homeowners, listing their home doesn't unlock freedom. It resets their costs. Higher monthly payments, higher rents, less control. So they stay, not because they believe prices will rise forever, but because every alternative feels worse. And that's why inventory isn't coming back. Not when rates fall, not when prices stall, and not the way people expect.
Why everyone is still waiting for inventory. Everyone is waiting for inventory to come back. Buyers are waiting for more listings. Analysts are waiting for supply to normalize. Commentators keep saying, just give it time. Time, apparently, is supposed to fix this, because in every housing cycle before this one, inventory eventually returned. Higher prices brought sellers out. Higher rates forced movement. Economic pressure created turnover. That pattern trained people to believe that supply is elastic, that if you pull hard enough, it comes loose. But this cycle broke that assumption, because the people holding the homes are not responding to prices the way markets expect. The core misunderstanding. Most market commentary treats inventory as a number: months of supply, new listings per week, active listings year over year. But inventory is not a statistic, it's a behavior. And behaviors don't change just because prices are high. They change when life after selling looks better than life before. That's the piece almost everyone misses. Why price signals are failing. In theory, record prices should unlock supply. Homeowners should look at their equity and think, this is my chance. But for most owners, equity isn't spendable freedom. It's trapped. Selling doesn't convert equity into a better situation. It converts it into a worse one. A higher monthly payment, a downgrade in location or space, a loss of control. So price appreciation stops functioning as an incentive. It becomes a deterrent. Because the higher prices go, the more expensive it becomes to re-enter the market. The mortgage as a structural lock. This is where this cycle truly diverges. Millions of homeowners are anchored to mortgages that no longer exist in the market, rates that are half of today's, payments that feel artificially low relative to income. Those mortgages don't just reduce housing costs, they redefine risk. They create a situation where staying put is the least volatile choice available. Selling doesn't feel like moving forward. It feels like stepping into instability. And people avoid instability even when logic says they shouldn't. Why forced sellers aren't showing up. Some argue inventory will return when homeowners are forced to sell. Job losses, economic slowdown, life events.
But forced selling doesn't scale the way people think. Most homeowners with ultra-low rates also locked in during periods of stable employment. They have cushions, savings, dual incomes, fixed payments that didn't reset with inflation. Pressure has to get extreme before it breaks that structure. And until then, inventory doesn't surge, it drips. Waiting for a world that doesn't exist yet. What most homeowners are actually waiting for isn't the top of the market. They're waiting for conditions that make selling survivable. Lower replacement costs, more rental stability, less payment shock. Until those things change, selling feels like a step backward. So inventory doesn't return because the future homeowners are being asked to trade into is objectively worse than the present they already control. The result, a market that looks broken but isn't. From the outside, this looks like dysfunction, low volume, low liquidity, frozen supply. But from the homeowner's perspective, it's rational. Inventory isn't missing, it's being withheld, not out of greed, not out of speculation, but out of self-preservation. And that's why waiting for inventory has become such a dangerous assumption, because the conditions required for it to return are far more structural than cyclical. Closing the chapter. So when people ask, why isn't inventory coming back? The answer isn't complicated. It's uncomfortable. Inventory isn't coming back because selling no longer improves people's lives, and until that equation flips, waiting won't change the outcome. Why falling rates won't unlock inventory. The most common belief in housing right now is simple. Once rates come down, inventory will come back. More sellers will list. More buyers will qualify. The market will normalize. That belief feels logical. It's also outdated because it assumes homeowners are reacting to today's rate, not to the cost of replacing what they already have. The rate comparison no one wants to make. For most homeowners, the question isn't, are rates lower than last year? The question is, are rates lower than mine? And for tens of millions of owners, the answer is no. A drop from 7.5% to 6.5% changes almost nothing when you're sitting at 2.8%. Even a large move down in rates still represents a massive payment reset. So falling rates don't feel like relief, they feel like a smaller penalty. Why affordability relief doesn't apply to sellers. When analysts talk about affordability improving, they're usually talking about buyers. Lower rates help new entrants, but sellers don't get that benefit. Sellers become buyers again, and in this cycle, that second step is the problem. Any homeowner who sells has to re-enter a market where monthly costs are structurally higher. So even if rates fall, replacement housing remains expensive. The math doesn't work. The lock-in effect doesn't reverse easily. There's a belief that lock-in disappears once rates dip below a psychological threshold, 6%, 5%. But lock-in isn't psychological, it's mathematical. As long as the spread between existing mortgages and market rates remains wide, movement stays constrained. And that spread doesn't close quickly. It takes years, not months, not headlines. Why lower rates can actually reduce inventory. Here's the counterintuitive part. Falling rates can reduce inventory in the short term because homeowners interpret lower rates not as a reason to sell, but as confirmation they made the right choice to stay. Lower rates support prices. Stable prices reinforce patience. So instead of unlocking listings, rate cuts can entrench them. They give homeowners confidence to wait even longer. The false promise of the next cycle. Many are betting on the next easing cycle to reset housing dynamics. But this isn't a normal cycle. The mortgage stock is permanently skewed. A huge portion of homeowners are insulated from market rates entirely. They're not waiting for relief. They already have it. Which means rate cuts don't activate supply, they protect it. Closing the chapter. So when people say, just wait for rates to fall, they're assuming that rates are the constraint. They're not. Replacement cost is. And until replacement cost meaningfully drops, lower rates won't bring inventory back. They'll just make the shortage feel more permanent. The hidden costs that keep homeowners frozen. Even if rates fall, even if prices stall, most homeowners still won't sell. Because the biggest barriers to inventory aren't the ones people talk about. They're the ones that show up after you decide to move. The transaction penalty no one models. Selling a home isn't free. It comes with friction, and that friction compounds. Agent commissions, transfer taxes, closing costs, moving expenses, renovations just to list. For many homeowners, that's tens of thousands of dollars gone before they even think about the next place.
That cost alone wipes out a large portion of the equity people assume is available. So when homeowners run the numbers, selling doesn't feel like unlocking value. It feels like paying a penalty just to stand still. Property taxes don't reset, they jump. This is one of the least discussed constraints in housing. Many long-term homeowners are protected by capped property tax assessments. Selling breaks that protection. The moment you buy again, your tax basis resets to today's prices. That can mean a permanent increase in annual costs, not a temporary shock. For some households, the property tax jump alone makes moving financially irrational, not painful, irrational. Insurance has become a wild card. Home insurance used to be predictable. It isn't anymore.
Premiums are rising faster than inflation in large parts of the country. Coverage is being pulled, deductibles are increasing, risk is being repriced. For homeowners who move, insurance isn't just more expensive, it's uncertain. And uncertainty kills mobility. People don't sell into environments where future costs are unknowable. The rent backup plan no longer works. In previous cycles, homeowners could sell and rent temporarily. That option absorbed shock. Today, rent is no longer a soft landing. Rents reset quickly. Leases are short. Annual increases are unpredictable. For many homeowners, renting feels riskier than owning, even at a higher monthly cost. So the fallback option disappears. And without a fallback, people stay put. Mobility used to be the safety valve. In healthy housing markets, mobility absorbs pressure. People move for jobs, for family, for lifestyle changes. But when moving increases risk across every dimension, cost, control, stability, mobility shuts down. And when mobility shuts down, inventory doesn't circulate, it ossifies. Closing the chapter. Inventory isn't constrained by a single variable. It's constrained by a stack of costs that all reset at once when you sell. Mortgage, taxes, insurance, transaction friction, rental uncertainty. Each one alone is manageable. Together, they freeze behavior. That's why inventory isn't coming back, not because homeowners are stubborn, but because moving has become structurally expensive.
Why new construction can't fix inventory. When existing homeowners don't sell, the market turns to builders. If inventory won't come back, just build more. On paper, that sounds like the solution. In reality, it misunderstands the problem. New supply doesn't replace old supply. New construction doesn't function like existing homes. It enters the market differently. It serves different buyers. It carries different costs. Most new homes are priced at the top of the market because they have to be. Land is more expensive, labor is scarcer, materials haven't deflated meaningfully. Builders can't produce affordable inventory at scale without destroying margins. So new supply doesn't unlock choice, it concentrates it. Builders respond to risk, not shortage. There's an assumption that low inventory automatically leads to aggressive building. That's not how construction works. Builders don't respond to scarcity. They respond to financing conditions. Construction loans are expensive. Carry costs are high. Demand visibility is limited. In an environment with volatile rates and frozen resale activity, builders stay cautious. They don't flood the market. They ration supply. New homes don't create mobility. Even when new homes sell, they don't solve the core issue. They don't free up existing homes unless someone sells first. A buyer moving from renting into a new build adds demand without releasing supply. Inventory stays tight. Mobility doesn't improve. The system remains clogged. Location mismatch makes it worse. Most building is happening where land is still available. That's often far from job centers, schools, and established communities. For homeowners who are locked into place, new construction doesn't offer a substitute. It offers a trade-off they don't want. Longer commutes, higher insurance, higher taxes, less infrastructure. So even when homes are built, they don't pull inventory loose where it's needed most. The time lag problem. Even if builders wanted to ramp aggressively, it wouldn't show up quickly. Permitting takes time, financing takes time, construction takes time. By the time new supply reaches the market, conditions have already shifted. Builders know this. That's why they stay conservative. Closing the chapter. New construction isn't irrelevant, but it's not a release valve. It doesn't replace frozen homeowners. It doesn't restore mobility. It doesn't reset affordability. It fills gaps at the margins while the core of the market stays locked. That's why betting on builders to fix inventory misses the point. The shortage isn't about homes, it's about movement.
What happens when inventory never comes back? When inventory stays low long enough, the damage doesn't show up all at once. It accumulates, quietly. And by the time people notice, the system has already changed. Prices stop being signals. In normal markets, prices guide behavior. High prices attract sellers. Low prices attract buyers. But in a frozen market, prices stop functioning as signals. They become artifacts. They reflect scarcity, not willingness to transact. That's why prices can stay high, even when volume collapses. Not because demand is strong, but because supply refuses to circulate. Liquidity disappears before prices do. This is the part most people miss. Markets don't break on price first. They break on liquidity. Fewer listings, fewer transactions, longer holding periods. That creates a market where outcomes become uneven. Some homeowners transact at favorable moments. Others are forced to move at the worst possible time. The gap widens. The market becomes less fair and less functional. When movement is limited, access becomes inherited. Who gets a low-rate home depends on timing, not effort. Younger buyers face fewer options. Relocating workers face higher costs. Families are locked out of neighborhoods permanently. Housing stops being a ladder, it becomes a gate. Policy loses its leverage. Low inventory also weakens policy tools. Rate cuts don't stimulate movement. Incentives don't create listings. Programs can't force mobility. The market becomes resistant to intervention because the constraints are structural, not cyclical. And structural problems don't respond to short-term fixes. Risk gets repriced across society. When housing stops circulating, risk doesn't disappear. It migrates to renters, to younger households, to labor mobility, to regional inequality. The cost of immobility shows up elsewhere, in wage pressure, in commuting time, in delayed family formation. The housing shortage becomes an economic drag. Closing the chapter. A market without inventory doesn't crash dramatically. It hardens. It becomes less responsive, less fair, and less forgiving. And once that happens, waiting for normal stops being a strategy, because normal depended on movement, and movement is what's missing.
This isn't a cycle, it's a permanent rewrite. For most people, it still feels temporary. Rates will fall, inventory will return, things will loosen up. That belief is comforting, but it assumes the housing market is still governed by the same forces that used to reset it. It isn't. The system no longer needs participation to survive. Old housing markets required movement. They needed people to sell so others could buy. They needed turnover to keep prices, wages, and mobility connected. This system doesn't. It can survive with very few transactions. Prices don't need volume to hold. Ownership doesn't need liquidity to feel stable. The system no longer breaks when people stop moving. That's the fundamental shift. When housing stops being a market and becomes a balance sheet. For millions of homeowners, housing is no longer something they interact with, it's something they hold. They don't check prices to decide whether to sell, they check prices to confirm they're protected. The home becomes a static asset, not a dynamic decision. And when enough people behave this way, the market loses its ability to self-correct. Why even pressure doesn't work anymore. In past cycles, stress created motion. Higher costs forced trade-offs. Economic downturns forced sales. This time, stress is uneven. Those with fixed low payments absorb it. Those without get crushed by it. The pressure doesn't circulate, it concentrates, which means stress no longer releases inventory, it hardens positions. The feedback loop that locks inventory permanently.
Here's the loop that matters. Low inventory supports prices. Stable prices reward staying. Staying reduces transactions. Low transactions reinforce scarcity. Once that loop forms, it feeds itself. No catalyst is required, just time. Why policy is largely powerless here. Policy works best when people are already on the edge of moving. This market isn't on the edge, it's entrenched. Rate cuts help buyers, not sellers. Tax incentives nudge margins, not behavior. Supply programs add units, not circulation. The constraint isn't motivation, it's replacement cost and risk. Policy can't easily touch either. The long-term cost no one budgets for. A market without movement doesn't collapse, it quietly reallocates opportunity. Who gets access depends on inheritance. Who builds wealth depends on timing. Who moves up depends on who already owns. Housing stops being a bridge, it becomes a wall. And walls don't announce themselves, they just get taller every year. The most dangerous assumption left. The final assumption people cling to is this, that something will force change. But the system no longer requires change to function. It's stable precisely because it excludes. That's what makes this moment different, not fragile, durable. The final reframe. Inventory isn't coming back because the market no longer rewards letting go. It rewards holding. It rewards immobility. It rewards waiting inside the system while others wait outside it. This isn't about fear. It isn't about speculation. It isn't about stubborn homeowners. It's about incentives that no longer point toward movement. Last thought. Housing didn't break. It finished evolving into a system where fewer people move, fewer people enter, and fewer people ever leave. And once a market reaches that point, waiting for the old rules to return isn't patience, it's denial.
If this helped you see the housing market a little clearer, you might want to stick around. I'm breaking this down step by step, not from headlines, but from what homeowners are actually dealing with right now. So if you haven't yet, consider subscribing. Not for alerts, just so you don't miss the next part of this story. Thanks for spending your time here. I really appreciate it. See you in the next one.